And I'm going to talk you through writing a personal narrative short paragraph about a rite of passage in which you've participated. So if you look at the top of this handout, you can see that I give you the prompt, and of course if you're watching the video, you're already here. So the first thing I have to do is make sure that I make a copy of this document that I can type in. I'll go to File, Make a Copy, hit OK. Any minute now. There it is. Okay, so I'm going to take you through the document, and then I'm going to do an example writing of my own to show you how the process works and what my thinking looks like as I'm doing my writing. So first off, I have to know what a rite of passage is before I can write about one. And here's a definition of a rite of passage. So a rite of passage is an event that happened in your life that made you grow up or change or mature or see the world from a more grown-up perspective. So here's some examples of formal rites of passage. That means things that like you do through your family or your church or another organization that lots of people do. So a bar bat mitzvah is a rite of passage. A quinceañera is a rite of passage. Making your confirmation is a rite of passage. Turning 13 in our society and becoming a teenager is a pretty formal rite of passage. Getting your learner's permit to drive can be a formal rite of passage. So if you don't want to do something like that, you can always think about more informal rites of passage. So these are things that not everybody celebrates, but for you may have been a turning point in your life. So something like finding out about Santa or the Tooth Fairy. Finding out a really grown-up lesson in life, like the idea that people who do the right thing don't always get rewarded, and people who lie sometimes come out ahead. That's probably something that you've learned in life by this point. Maybe the first time you had to save up money to buy something you wanted. You could write about your first love and your first breakup. Maybe you've had to get a job to earn money to help your family pay bills, and you've had to take on some adult responsibilities. Writing about the death of a loved one or the death of a pet. So maybe when you were younger, it's the first time you understood about death and dying. Maybe you could write about getting to stay home by yourself for the first time. That's a big deal for a lot of kids. You can think about other firsts that were like grown-up things, like cooking on the stove for the first time or doing your own laundry for the first time or some other chore. So as you write, here's what I want you to be paying attention to. These are the things that you can proofread for when you go back to check your work. So for personal narrative writing, you would use I and me. This is a personal narrative, so you're going to write it using that perspective. Later on, you're going to do other types of writing that don't use I or me, but this time you would. Make sure you're using complete sentences that have a subject and a verb. Make sure you start every sentence with a capital letter. Make sure you end every sentence with punctuation. Capitalize I throughout your writing. Use descriptive words with the correct meaning. So next, let's go over the organizer. This is going to create, at minimum, a one-paragraph response. Now, you may very well have to go through and break this up into multiple paragraphs because we'd really like to see you start to expand the sensory details in your writing to have like a little bit longer piece of writing. So you're going to outline your exposition, 2 rising actions, and your climax and resolution. So I have to decide what I'm going to write about. And part of me really wanted to write about something that you guys would have experienced as young people, but I also want to make sure that I'm taking the opportunity to write about something meaningful to me. So I'm going to write about something that you guys probably don't have a lot of experience with yet, which is finally figuring out when you are an adult. So I think I'm going to write about how I didn't really feel like an adult until I was 28 and I had my son, Matt. So before that, I kind of felt like a kid, and I don't think I was very good at being responsible. And I had to grow up and be responsible finally when I was 28 years old. Okay, so now that I kind of have in my head what I'm going to write, I'm going to go ahead and start typing. So let's look at our exposition. Set the scene. Tell the reader what they need to know to understand the story you're about to tell. For a rite of passage, your age is going to be important. Describe the setting, describe the characters. Okay, I'm going to go on to add that for the rite of passage, and I need to add this to the other copy I'm making, you need to tell me how you were before the rite of passage occurred. So where did you start? Because that way, by the end of the writing, you've told me where you ended up and how you were different. So I'm going to start by writing and making sure I talk about my age. When I was 28 years old, and I think I have to write out 28. Oh, look, it did it for me. And I don't think I want to say years old. I just want to say 28. I was still basically a child. I'd been married for 6 years. I owned a house. I had a job as a teacher. I had a car payment. But in my mind, I wasn't really grown up yet. I still thought mostly about myself and didn't really understand what it meant to be responsible for another person's happiness. Okay, so let me kind of read this over. I kind of want to make sure I have everything. So I have to say how I was before so that I can explain what happened and explain how I was different after. So when I was 28, I was still basically a child. I'd been married for 6 years. I owned a house. I had a job as a teacher. I had a car payment. But in my mind, I wasn't really grown up yet. I still thought mostly about myself and didn't really understand what it meant to be responsible for another person's happiness. Now, if I were writing a much longer writing, I might go in and add a little bit about the kind of stuff I did. So I was like going out with the girls on the weekends, sleeping late, spending money on just like kind of frivolous things sometimes, like a new purse or like, going out of town on a trip. And I didn't really have to be responsible for much. And I feel like I covered the characters and I covered my setting and background information. So I feel like I can go to my rising actions. So let's see. So explain the first thing that happened that created conflict and started to lead you towards the climax of your story. For this writing, this is something you did to prepare for the rite of passage or something that happened that forced you to grow and change. Okay, so this is probably where, since I'm going to write about when my son was born, like finding out I was pregnant was probably going to be a place I needed to start for a rising action. So, like, I found out I was pregnant at the beginning of the school year. And I would say, and I have to kind of think through what I want to write. So like, it wasn't that I didn't want kids, but I don't think I really thought much about it. It was just kind of like, I was going to have a kid because that's what I thought you were supposed to do. I was like 28, and so I just figured it was time to have kids. And I don't really think I understood what I was getting myself into. So I kind of want to express that here. It was sort of a surprise. I mean, and I want to I'm using a really informal tone here because it's a personal narrative. It wasn't that I didn't want kids, or that I did. I think I just figured I was about the right age to become a mom, so I got pregnant. And, I'd been married for 6 years and stuff. I mean, my life was pretty stable. It seemed like the next logical step in life. And I feel like there's so much I could write about here, so I have to kind of decide what I want to do next. I think I'm gonna include some stuff about like what it was like to be pregnant with Matt, because it was pretty rough. Like, I'm not gonna lie, you're gonna get to hear all about it. Okay, so I didn't, okay, so what I need to mention here is, I feel like I need a new paragraph. Okay. You guys don't usually see me stumbling this much with my writing, but I think this is a hard story for me to tell, and I'm trying to decide what the most important information you need is. So, The only experience I'd had with pregnancy and babies before, well, I don't want to say it that way. Okay. The only experience I'd had with pregnancy and babies before I think I'll just say that, was with my sister-in-law when she had my niece, Ansley. Kate, that's my sister-in-law, had a really easy pregnancy. She felt pretty good full time. Ansley was an easy baby who slept well and smiled a lot. I thought all babies were like Ansley. And all pregnancies were. I'm going to add this too. I was so wrong. So I'm going to talk about the first 4 weeks of pregnancy went fine. I was tired, but otherwise okay. About a month in, the barfing started. I'm going to just add some humor too. Have you ever watched the movie The Exorcist? I have to put it in italics because it's the title. If you don't know what I'm talking about, just look up The Exorcist on YouTube and like the vomiting scene, it'll be on there. I was throwing up like that. I didn't have morning sickness. I had morning, noon, and night sickness. I threw up in my sleep. No joke. This wasn't what I had signed up for. Yeah, I just thought everybody like felt great like Kate did. Whew, I was deluded. So I said I threw up in my sleep. This wasn't what I had signed up for. Okay, I kind of want to read over what I've got. Okay. First 4 weeks went fine, tired, but otherwise okay. Month in, the barfing started. Oh, okay, so this is where I have to mention this. I need to add something. Everyone said I'd feel better after the first trimester. That's like the first 3 months. Like a lot of people feel sick like right in the beginning because your body has to get used to all the hormones and stuff. Everyone said I'd feel better after the first trimester. I held on to that hope, counting down the days, until I hit the, what would have been, 12-week mark. And I'd feel better. Ha. I was sick the entire time, even for 2 weeks after Matt was born. This was not what I had signed up for. Okay, so I feel like that's actually like several paragraphs, but I just feel like that's what I need to do to tell this story. Okay, so there's my first rising action. I kind of talked about what it was like when I was pregnant and how that was like really different than what I expected. Okay, so now I'm going to get to my second rising action. So it makes sense. Like I talked about the being pregnant part. Now I'm going to talk about like what Matt was like as a baby. Whew, he was a lot. Like, and I hope he's watching this video because he knows he was a lot. His sister gloats about it because she was really easy later. Okay, so once Matt was actually born, he was an adorable baby. He was really cute. I'm going to say an adorable baby that screamed and barfed literally 24. I think I can do 24. No, I need to write it out because it's a number less than 100. And I'm going to talk about my niece had been such an easy baby. Matt was not. Nothing I did soothed him. I rocked him. I fed him. I sang to him. I read to him. I mean, I was like reading to a 6-week-old. I read to him. I drove him around in the car. I took him for walks in his stroller. Screaming and barfing. Barfing and screaming. Sleeping for 45 minutes. Wait, I have to write that out because it's less than 100. Hang on. 45 minutes at a stretch and howling in between. And I feel like this is where I need a new paragraph. And so I want to parallel my structure a little bit because I think it's good storytelling. So I had that part up here about how everybody said it'd just be like, hang on until this point and then things will get better. Everyone said to hang in there. Lots of babies are colicky. That means they like cry all the time. You don't know why. Colicky. He'd be better once he was 3 months old. Wait and see. I waited. And all I saw was a screaming kid who never smiled. It was awful. And I think I'm going to reiterate because I like that parallel structure. That means I kind of repeat something on purpose. This was not what I had signed up for. But I was his mom. It was my job to love him no matter how hard things were or how tired I was. And your own moms, you need to go hug your mother after you read this and ask them if you were a good baby, because I'll bet some of you were screamy little babies too. Okay, so, but I was his mom. It was my job to love him no matter how hard things were or how tired I was. For the first time in my life, I truly had to step up and put another person's needs first. Okay, so I feel like the climax and resolution, like I'm almost starting to get into that now. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the climax and resolution. Okay, I feel like this was actually my climax. Hang on. Okay, so I'm going to put that down here. Get rid of some of those extra spaces. Okay, so there's my climax and my resolution. I feel like I need to say a little bit more about this. So, and notice I'm pausing. I have to take time to stop and think. I know sometimes you guys think your teachers just like automatically come up with like great writing. We don't. Okay, so explain what you learned about yourself or how you changed or grew from the experience. Oh, I think I need to give you some resolution. It took, okay, I'm not even kidding about this, 5 years for Matt to finally do something besides cry all the time. No kidding. And he doesn't even have any neurological problems. He was just a really grouchy person. Like we had him tested for everything. By the way, it took 5 years for Matt to finally do something besides cry all the time. He's still a moody guy, but has grown up to be a decent person with good grades and a job. I'm going to say, I guess we both had to grow up a lot. Okay, I feel like this is an okay rough draft. Okay, so look at this. If you go down here, it says, congratulations, you've written your rough draft. Go back, delete all the blue typing. You'll just be left with the black parts. Organize that into paragraphs and proofread your work. So I'm going to get rid of all this blue stuff. And I'm going to show you to make sure you know how to format paragraphs. Notice I'm leaving a little space right now because I haven't indented anything yet. And mine's kind of a longer narrative. Yours may be shorter, but we want you to work towards a little bit longer narrative. So I'm getting rid of like all the prompting. And like actually if I'm done with all of this part, I can probably even get rid of all of this. Like once I'm done with all that, I'm done with all of that. Okay, so I'm going to do some formatting next. So for each paragraph, I can't do it like this where I just put spaces in between. I'm going to tab in for each paragraph and no extra spaces between the paragraphs. So I'm just formatting. And I'll check a couple of other things. Get rid of that extra stuff. Okay, so now I feel like I'm all formatted. Now, if this were a formal essay, I would make this double spaced, but as it is, I'm just going to check for a couple things. First off, did I left-hand justify my margin? I did. I didn't center this. It has to look this way. Next thing, did I use 12-point font? Yep. Did I use an academic font? What that means is I can use Lexend, which is a dyslexia-friendly font that is becoming more widely accepted. I could use Arial or Times New Roman. Don't use Comic Sans or anything like that. Finally, if this were an academic essay, I'd make sure that all of my margins were 1 inch, but this 1/2 inch margin is fine. Okay, so the last thing I would do is if I'd use this guide to write my narrative, I would copy it and paste it into the one that we're turning in for class, and then I'm good to go. All right, guys, so that is my personal narrative. I relived one of the most traumatic chapters of my life, and you got to come along for the ride. All right, good luck with your writing, guys.